I would now request Dr. Rajesh Shah to please introduce our next speaker.
Hello, good afternoon, friend. Our next speaker is Dr. Sanjay Kalra. He is a MD DM from AIMS and is a FRCB Edinburgh consultant. He is attached with at Karnal Bharati Hospital. He is also visiting professor at AIMS Rishikesh, India. He is immediate past president and of Endocrine Society of India. He is also a vice president of South Asian Federation of Endocrine Society. He is a very much educational editor, International Society of Endocrine. He is a practicing endocrinologist. And now I request Dr. Sanjay Kalra to start his speech. Thank you.
Good day, friends. Today we'll talk about a concept which may seem simple but is actually very profound in its understanding of what we do in the diabetes clinic, in the metabolic clinic, in the chronic care setting. We'll talk about a concept known as DBCD, dysglycemia based chronic disease. We'll try to explain this based upon the phenomenon of metabolic flexibility, and then we'll see how these concepts are relevant to our daily practice. Once upon a time, in our world, most men and women were lean. These men and women were healthy as well. But then challenges came onto our plate. And these challenges, they came in a very insidious way. We began eating more fat, more carbohydrate, more processed foods. Initially, these foods seemed like friends. They helped us fight malnutrition. They helped us fight undernutrition. They helped us become heavier and healthier. But then suddenly what happened was these friends turned into foes. The reason is that the foods we began eating created more of insulin in the body, because insulin is required to process and to assimilate carbohydrates. Because we had more of insulin, we also began getting more of counter regulatory hormones. So we ended up with a situation where our beta cells and alpha cells together, our islets of Langerhans, became stressed. The beta cells began producing more insulin because more insulin was required to handle all the food that we were eating. When the beta cells began working, the adjacent alpha cells also began producing more glucagon. That led to another counter regulation where the beta cells had to produce more insulin, and the end result was that our islets of Langerhans got tired. When the islets of Langerhans got tired, the drums of disease began to beat. In most Indian languages, right from north to south, east to west, the word drum is said to be the dhol. So today we'll talk about the dhol of disease. We'll talk about how we can unify the various presentations of metabolic disease. Once we've unified these, we'll talk about the common connector, which is metabolic inflexibility. And then we'll see how we can manage metabolic inflexibility, what we can share with our patients, and whether we need more drugs to help us overcome this challenge. Like we said, the word dhol stands for drum, and it is this dhol which helped me understand as a student the entire spectrum of metabolic syndrome. D stands for diabetes, H for high blood pressure, O for overweight, and L for lipids. If you happen to speak in Punjabi, then you add another L, dhol, and that L can be used for triglycerides or it can be used for fatty liver. In some states, like in Uttar Pradesh and in Madhya Pradesh, the word dholki or dholaki is used for uh, a small drum, and small means micro. So dholki, Ki, would help us remember that the kidney is also included in some definitions of metabolic syndrome because of microalbuminuria. There are many more acronyms that have been coined for the metabolic syndrome, but for me, I've been in medicine now for over 3 decades, in endocrinology for 2 decades plus. The dhol is an all-time favorite. It helps me remember that the drums of disease are beating. It helps me remember that these drums beat a bit louder in us, in Asians, than in other ethnicities. Because even though we may seem to be thin, we may seem to have a fairly normal body mass index, we actually have more of central adiposity. Not only do we have a different adipose tissue topography, we also have a different barophenotype. This means that our phenotype associated with adiposity is different. We have more of adipose tissue in the centrally located areas, the visceral tissue. Our adipose tissue is not all that healthy. We have less adiponectin, more of pro-inflammatory adipokines, and we have a characteristic dyslipidemia, which along with other dysfunction makes us more susceptible to dysglycemia and coronary artery disease. This means we have to fight disease. We have to cure disease. But then we all remember that prevention is better than cure. The one who rises early catches the best fish. So if we are able to catch dysfunction or dysmetabolism early, we can correct it early before disease occurs. We all know the levels of prevention: primordial, primary, secondary, tertiary. Some of us know quaternary prevention as well. Quaternary means preventing over medicalization. And there is also quinary prevention, which is an India coined term. Quinary prevention means preventing misinformation and promoting information regarding health. In today's talk, we will talk about all these levels. When we manage people with type 2 diabetes and complications, we are actually trying to practice tertiary prevention. But if we can go a bit earlier, see the spectrum in front of you. Let's move from right to left, Arabic style. If we can catch our patients a bit earlier, when they do not have symptoms, when they do not have complications, we've just diagnosed them based upon biochemistry, upon fasting and postprandial glucose, fasting and post-load glucose. Remember that postprandial glucose is used just for monitoring of diabetes. It's not used for diagnosis. Diagnosis will be post-load or post-glucose challenge. So we can diagnose based on fasting, post-load, or an HbA1c. We catch the patient at a biochemical level. Here what we are doing is early diagnosis, early management, and this is secondary prevention. But if we move earlier and we catch our patients earlier, even before they reach biochemical disease, maybe when they are in pre-diabetes, then we can practice primary prevention. These patients are at risk of developing diabetes. They may have pre-diabetes, they may have gestational diabetes mellitus. They may be using drugs which predispose to dysglycemia. We can intervene here at a primary prevention level. But the best situation would be primordial prevention. So if we can diagnose, if we can identify insulin resistance at a molecular level and prevent it from reaching even pre-diabetes, that would be the best service that we can give our patients. But then for this level, we would want interventions, whether pharmacological or non-pharmacological, which are very safe, which just act at the molecular level or at cardiometabolic risk level, and which do not cause hypoglycemia or do not cause other complications. But this spectrum in front of us, the slide that we see, helps us understand that diabetes does not occur in isolation. It is part of a chronic disease continuum or spectrum. And because diabetes is defined by glucose levels, we are calling it a dysglycemia based chronic disease continuum. And this concept comes from Mechanic et al. And it was published just 2 years ago. Basically, what the authors want to tell us is that there is a molecular dysfunction that leads to insulin resistance and then pre-diabetes and diabetes. So we should catch it early. Also, DBCD is not only accurate and inclusive, it is also actionable because we can actually take action in the clinic. That action may be behavioral therapy, it may be non-pharmacological treatment, it may be pharmacological treatment. But if we do all this together, we will certainly come out stronger. There are so many aspects of diabetes now. Dysglycemia, vascular dysfunction, overweight, visceral dysfunction, and psychological disorders. All these have to be handled together. At the same time, when we see patients coming to us with diabetes, we see that some of them have clinically obvious disease, others are subclinical, which means they don't have any symptoms and signs, but they do have biochemical dysfunction, and some are healthy. If we investigate further, we find that some of them have insulin resistance at the level of the adipose tissue, others at the level of the muscle, and others at the level of the liver as well, and perhaps the brain. How can we assess this? If we were to check fat composition or body composition, we would see that some of our patients have increased visceral adipose tissue. Others have triglyceride deposits in their muscles, and yet others have liver steatosis, or what we now term as MAFLD, metabolic associated fatty liver disease. All these are different aspects of the same spectrum. All these are interrelated with each other. It's just that they are at different levels in the progression of disease. So we can choose to look at our patient from a clinical viewpoint. We can choose to look at our patient from an insulin resistance viewpoint, looking at the three main organs that are involved in this: adipose tissue, muscle, and liver. Or we can look at it from a vascular viewpoint, looking at microvascular complications and also macrovascular complications, which keep on progressing with time. But irrespective of how we view our patient, we will agree that we have to hit early. We have to hit in a timely manner. We have to hit hard. We have to hit effectively. And we have to hit very safely so that we don't hurt ourselves. To understand where to hit, we should understand the powerhouse of the cell. This term was coined just about 60 to 70 years ago, and this stands for the mitochondria. It is the mitochondria where actually metabolic flexibility comes into being. Metabolic flexibility is the ability of an organism to respond or adapt according to changes in metabolic or energy supply and metabolic or energy demand. So, for example, look at the concept of hibernation in winter and estivation, aestivation, estivation in some tropical animals in summer. In hibernation in winter, there is less energy supply, so therefore energy demand of the organism goes down. In estivation in summer, the organism gets less supply, so the demand goes down. So based upon external environment, the animal is able to adjust itself and is able to survive longer. Similarly, in human beings, based upon whether we get carbohydrate or whether we get fat as fuel, whether we are fasting or whether we are in a fed state, our mitochondria are flexible enough to plan their activity accordingly. If we are metabolically flexible, we will be able to use fat when it is available, glucose when that is available, and we'll be able to adjust our activity level. In this dysglycemia based chronic disease, however, even before type 2 diabetes occurs, metabolic inflexibility comes into play. Metabolic inflexibility means that now suddenly the mitochondria is not able to adjust. The mitochondria is not able to understand whether we are getting more of glucose or more of fat. The mitochondria gets confused as to whether we should use more of fatty acid for oxidation or glucose for oxidation, or whether we should convert more of our calories into glycogen. Should we focus more on lipolysis, or should we use the food that is coming in, the nutrients that are coming in from the GIT? The mitochondria also gets confused as to whether it should act according to sleep or according to exercise. So metabolic flexibility versus inflexibility can be explained very simply through the concept of a hybrid car. A hybrid car knows when to use petrol and when to use other green fuels based upon the requirement, based upon the need for efficiency, based upon the time of driving that is required. The car's engine will adjust. But in a metabolically inflexible person, the mitochondria get overloaded. Why do they get overloaded? There are explanations for this. Of course, with aging, with mutations, the mitochondria will become weaker. But the main challenge is overloading. When we overload our mitochondria and our system with too much of glucose and too much of free fatty acids, something called a mitochondrial gridlock occurs. Our mitochondria just get confused. It's like a traffic jam that occurs in our cities every day. There is a traffic policeman, there are traffic lights, there are roads, there are roundabouts, but a gridlock means that these systems are not strong enough to handle the amount of traffic that is on those roads or the number of vehicles that have come onto those roads. Similarly, in the mitochondria, sometimes the system is not able to decide whether to choose glucose or fatty acid. And because of this indecision, the mitochondria gets stuck. There is less efficiency. There is less variation in insulin profile, and we end up with hyperinsulinemia. Even when insulin is not required, it keeps on getting secreted from the beta cells, which, like we said, are already tired. So these mitochondria now have helped us unify our understanding of the entire concept of dysglycemia based chronic disease. Metabolic flexibility and metabolic inflexibility allow us to counsel our patients in a very simple manner. How do we counsel our patients? We tell them that the basic unit of dysfunction is not the liver or the kidney. It is all of these. But it's not that there are 10 or 15 different types of dysfunctions in the body. It's basically one dysfunction acting at the mitochondrial level. Once they've understood this, once they've understood the truth, we help them interpret it. And this saying from the Rig Veda, the truth is one, but interpretations are many, is quite apt in today's India. It is also apt for all the various guidelines that we see. We have different guidelines for virtually every aspect of medical care, every aspect of chronic care. But the guidelines will target either dysglycemia or dyslipidemia or hypertension or coronary artery disease or obesity all separately. Putting them together is quite challenging. And it should be challenging because there are so many different facets of diabetes. But with this unified coding, with metabolic inflexibility, how we can counsel our patient is, the presentations may be many, the clinical presentations, but the intervention is one. And that intervention is good clinical sense, good clinical practice. Number one, restrict calories. If you cannot restrict calories and you are overweight, use calorie restriction mimetics. These are drugs which will act on AMP kinase pathway, like metformin and SGLT2 inhibitors, and will actually mimic calorie restriction at the level of the mitochondria. You can also use alpha glucosidase inhibitors, and these days drugs which are popular for their extra benefits are GLP-1 receptor analogs. I apologize for the typo here, and SGLT2 inhibitors. Apart from calorie restriction, we also need exercise. Exercise will help stimulate the mitochondria of the muscle and will reduce the adipose tissue as well. If we cannot use exercise, if we cannot practice exercise, then exercise mimetics are also available. For example, metformin, for example, SGLT2 inhibitors. All these drugs put together can actually be used in a very strategic manner to defeat the strong dhol. Our strategy should be correct, according to Vidur in the Mahabharata. But still, we do not have an ideal drug for DBCD. The ideal drug should be one that should be able to manage all presentations of this chronic disease, which should be extremely safe, which should help in barophenotypic optimization as well, in optimizing our weight and adipose tissue topography, and which should be able to prevent complications. It should be easy to use, quite flexible to use, and there should be no serious adverse events. We are still searching for such a drug, but the good news is that drugs such as these are on the horizon. So today what we have discussed is concept of dysglycemia based chronic disease. We've discussed the concept of metabolic inflexibility. We've seen how we can make it flexible. We've talked of good clinical sense. We've talked of diet and exercise. But we all know that these are easier to preach, very difficult to practice. We do have calorie restriction mimetics and exercise restriction mimetics, but they too are not enough. So hopefully, when we get new drugs which are able to offer us metabolic flexibility, it will become much easier for us to help our patients. Until then, we should keep on counseling our patients about the pathogenesis of this disease, about encouraging the patient, the family, and the community to catch this disease early at the preclinical, at the biochemical level. And we should encourage our community to be more flexible in terms of diet, to be more flexible in terms of exercise, to exercise more, to ensure flexibility exercises, to be more flexible in terms of stress management, so that metabolic flexibility can be used to prevent and manage metabolic syndrome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sanjay sir.